All right. Hello, my friends. It is Dr. Rich Scheibner. Hope you're all doing well wherever you are in the world. Because today we're talking about writing as and traveling and as traveling. Hope everybody had a really nice break during reading week. One reason I wanted to talk about this topic today and bring in some special guests, talk about my own experiences, because I recently went to Norway for a conference called Writing Research Across Borders. So I can just show you a bit about what that entailed. Actually going out to do that was super fun, being in Trondheim, Norway, and then spending some time going actually to other parts of Norway to just do some kind of fact finding, some exploring, see what like sort of life is like out there. So it was really great. And yeah, it was hosted by various faculty from the Norwegian University of Science and Technology in Norway, and beautiful to be near the Arctic Circle, to actually go to the Arctic Circle too. But before we get into all of that, let me just talk to you a little bit about the preview of today and things of that sort, and sort of what we're getting into, as well as what I tend to do at the beginning of these streams is give some acknowledgments. So I would like to once again thank Dr. John Suffren and the team and staff at the Writing Department and in the Writing Center for all the support for making this possible. While it's just me kind of running the show and running the broadcasting and all that sort of stuff that you see here, there's a lot of moving parts that make it possible, that help promote it. May Mac especially for helping with promoting, our work on social, and then some students are also working in my class to pare down parts of the interviews that we do for this, in more digestible kind of formats. So a lot of people involved in this, and big thanks to everyone for the support for making this possible. That being said, we have a number of other workshops in addition to the live stream, which is kind of its own workshop in and of itself, that you may want to check out. So we have workshops that are happening through each week throughout this term. My next one is until March 16th on research methods, but you can see there are a number that are coming up, like analyzing your assignment and then constructing an argument in a thesis. Moving on to where I'm coming on the 16th. These are all free. In addition to anti-racist writing, that's one we talked about a few weeks ago with our stream on anti-racism and writing processes. Organizing your draft, revising your sentences. I've taught these two, and I just love that they're free and open on Zoom. You can come in, you can simply listen, or you can think about sort of ideas as you go. It's usually a very informative and fun conversation. So do check those out. Again, free to anyone who wants to join. Also, we have one-on-one appointments, the big thing we do in the Writing Center. So if you're looking to work through a concept or clarify an assignment, decode what its requirements are, or you're looking to polish that final draft through some line editing and close reading by an instructor, bring it to the Writing Center. We have many hours that are available, many instructors that are ready to work with you and work with you at least once a week, sometimes even more if we have more opportunities. So check that out as well. We also have a multimedia language center that we partner with, an ESL Open Learning Center, and then drop-in sessions. In fact, yesterday there was a pop-up for the Writing Center in Central Square. So we're kind of trying to be innovative with how we support you all, whether it's through the stream or through another method. So do check those out, because they are all free and ready for your ideas. Okay, and so today, talking about writing as and traveling. What does it mean to kind of travel and unlock some ideas, or go on an assignment and then do the writing actually there? How do you navigate different sort of regions and positions, languages, dialects, tools that you need, things like that? We're going to talk in a little bit with Tyler Evans Tokarek as well, who's with the Institute sorry, excuse me, I for the Institute for the Study of University Pedagogy at the University of Toronto, Mississauga. Apologies for that little slip. But Tyler is an associate professor in the teaching stream as well as associate director, Scholarship of Teaching and Learning. So we met actually at RAB, and in a little bit, we're going to bring him on to talk about his experiences, because I learned a lot in his presentation about what it means to partner with, schools on an international scale, and just through conversation learned. And he has done some amazing stuff in terms of traveling and writing. So just a big thanks in advance for Tyler for joining us to discuss, his experiences. And just a little preview, which I'll revisit at the end. Next week we'll be talking about writing as and revising. How do you revise sort of sentences and things like that, or general, methods and so forth that may be useful for your projects. Writing as in virtual reality. If anybody's interested in trying that out, let me know. I've got some plans already underway. We're composing a lit review on March 22nd. Writing as presenting, so we can kind of play with that term a little bit, but what are some new tools and ideas you can think about when you're presenting your writing to publics? And then finally, we'll end with writing as and composing yourself. And so for most of these, we have special guests as well. Always a good time to chat and build on ideas through conversation. Okay, so let's go ahead and transition here just for a bit. I'm going to share some of my experiences of what I've done sort of in traveling. And, if you've done sort of this stuff for school or any kind of work, feel free to let me know. I would love to hear if you've had these similar experiences, because I've heard some of these across, different sort of researchers and writers who came to RAB or came to another conference, or simply just came to visit here to campus. When you're traveling, there's a lot that can go wrong. And I think we have to maybe anticipate that will happen more often than we like. So I'll share some of the things that I've done. Okay, so this is what I've called just kind of writing as and traveling, and just kind of cooked up a quick slide deck just so I could give you some visuals. So let's start with the dramatic thing that happened. And these are kind of also couched with advice if you have these kind of issues. When I was in San Francisco for a conference and doing a research trip last year, this is March 2022, so I'm going to go ahead and note that so we know temporally where we are. Immediately, I lost my passport. What I mean by that is I flew into SFO, the airport, and I got onto the public transit station called the BART. And usually when I travel, I'm wearing like really comfy pants, jogger or something like that. I just slid everything into my pockets, used my wallet, my permanent resident card and all that sort of stuff was in it, as well as my passport. It was sort of crammed into there. And I got on the BART. I got off probably 45 minutes later because I had to go into the city center. And I get off and I realize that wallet is no longer in my pocket. Nothing's actually in my pockets. And so I just started freaking out. I check every, crevice of my backpack that I have with me. Because usually I'm carrying something like this along with me when I'm traveling. It's just, enough to cram everything in it. In addition to like a carry-on or something else that I'm taking. And I couldn't find it. And the interesting thing was, on that public transit service, you can't actually get out of the transit unless you paid. So you pay, you check in, and then you check out, and that's how they sort of measure how far you've gone and how much you might owe. And so I had to ask them for some help with that. Luckily, I had my phone, which I could also use as a kind of wallet or credit card that was associated with it. But I looked for hours. I called my buddy, who was picking me up, and just said I didn't know what was going on. And, suddenly you just feel like you have nowhere to go, nothing to do. So I called Canadian Immigration and filed a report, asked what do I have to do? And they had told me at the time that I had to reapply for sort of everything. And I'm a U.S. citizen, Canadian permanent resident. So this was going to be potentially a mess to go through. Very unfortunate. I just tuned in. The first thing I heard was I lost my passport. Yeah, I got to start. Dia, welcome. Yeah, it was dramatic. Like, I mean, just imagine getting onto that station. You're happy. You're going to see your friends. You're about to go get your like check-in with whether it's like your lodging or it's the hotel, the conference or something like that. Everything's all jolly. The flight was great, and then you lose your credentials, your identity, things like that. So not only was it like the wallet, but it was a passport too, and all that. So this all happens it's just hours of sort of dread and terror. And if I wanted to, I could show you the many things that my wife said to me about that over text, but I'll spare you all that and her. So but lucky me, here's the thing that totally I'm super grateful for. I can thank the rhetorical fates, I guess, or gods for this support. But someone found my wallet on the transit service, and my number was inside because it was on an old bike receipt from a bike repair shop, that is. And they called me and they said, we found your wallet and your passport and everything on and this was a woman who said, my dad found it. I'm calling for him. We don't want anything from you at all. We just want to let you know we have it. If you want to come pick it up, you can. And so they're probably 2 hours away, at this point from where I was. So luckily my friends drove me out there. It was great. And we picked it up. And honestly, I had some American cash in my wallet, and it was a substantial amount. They gave me the wallet back and I said, here, they said, no, we don't want anything. I said, no, you have saved me so much time, potentially thousands of dollars to get this thing renewed. So that's all to say, I always wear comfortable pants with zipped pockets. Now you can put this in your bag, sure, but if you're keeping your personal belongings with you, it's easy to forget that sometimes those things can slip through. What I suspect is because I didn't have them zipped up, it's very comfortable, like sweats basically. It just fell out when I was sitting, in this new station. And you're kind of disoriented because you're traveling, it's kind of euphoric. You get to a new place. It's really easy to forget that sort of stuff. So I hope that hasn't happened to anybody else. But yes, indeed, I got super lucky. Yeah, I was shocked that it happened, that somebody took the time to do that, because there's a lot of valuable things in there. And again, just super grateful and super lucky. Okay, so moving on to this, where to stay, let be something you think about, and perhaps Tyler and I can talk about this too when he joins us, is, I prefer to use those kind of home sharing services, such as Airbnb and hotels, if I can manage it, if it makes sense. I mean, for me, I was going to a smaller sort of city in Norway for this conference that I was mentioning earlier. And it was a quick walk to the conference from, just the neighborhoods. And so the pro for me, I would say, is just I get a sense of the city when I'm sort of in that local perspective, staying at one of their places. And it's usually cheaper than a hotel. I made the mistake of not booking my hotel for this conference well ahead of time, and so couldn't take advantage of any discounts and rates that are sometimes available if you're on that for a trip. But if you're just going to sort of get a sense of the city and the kind of local, experience, so to say, this might be a good option for you. Luckily, the two people that I stayed with as part of this were very kind in giving me instructions of places where to go, preferred sort of coffee spots, things like that, restaurants, bars, what have you. And you may not always get that. You may get someone that just wants to stay hands off and says, here's the code, have fun, bye. But for me, I had a little bit more support in that, and I asked a couple questions. You're going to get that as well if you do go to a hotel, but I think being on the ground level, it's kind of fun, right? And there's enough safety checks. It seems like that it's okay, but acknowledge that there is still a risk, right? Quality control can be kind of difficult. So if you're looking at things just purely through pictures, it may be a bit different. Who knows? Some people may have had those experiences. Please let me know if you have. I've had one that was, I think it was in Kansas City. I was going for some travel to do some interviews, and the address was slightly different from the one that was advertised, and it ended up being in a kind of, we'll just say basement sort of apartment that was a bit further away than was originally advertised. So I'm trying to be kind and give them the benefit of the doubt, but that was something that, you know, I had to sort of grapple with in terms of how I got to point A to point B, given that it was outside of the public transit circle. And, you know, you have to provide your own meals and other services, but that's fun sometimes, you know, get something down the street, cook up your own meals. You know, whereas I know that at the hotel that a lot of my colleagues were at, like, that stuff was provided. If you have any kind of problems and security issues, things like that, it can be kind of addressed by the hotel in a larger infrastructure. So you take the good with the bad, right? And I'm also saying this from the position as a white man who's about 6 foot tall, right? Like, I have a position that may be easier for me to navigate the world in this way. So I want to be sensitive to that, these kind of claims I'm making. Research and writing tools. So what are you taking with you, right? Like, if you're going out, what are all the things you should bring, while also making sure you have, you know, enough room for this and that you're comfortable. If you're out all day, like, if I'm doing this means I can't put anything at the hotel and have that as a home base if I'm presenting research or writing with other colleagues at a professional event like this. So oftentimes I'm carrying my book bag around all day, and do I want to lug all this stuff with me is a question I always have to ask myself. So this is a picture of me outside of Oslo near the end of my recent trip, and it's just taken from a camera. It's a little soft in terms of the focus, but you know, I don't know, there's kind of, it's a question we have to kind of think about. So my list was, for example, like GoPro camera, phone, clips and anchors for the camera, phone, like if I want to attach it to like my bag or like onto my headset, you know, or helmet or things like that. Lots of different ways you can do it. I brought a small notebook that I could just put into a back pocket, and then a large notebook that I could take if I'm going to like do a more extensive interview, or if I just want to write, you know, more extensively, let's say like on a train ride or a flight or something like that. And then my laptop. Now, like, my laptop is massive. And again, I'm really lucky the university supported me in my startup for, you know, getting those kind of tools. But when you're on the road, that's not something that you may want to bring with you. It can be like pretty damn heavy. And I'm not gonna lie, like sometimes I'm standing in line, or if I was waiting and doing this kind of work in Nora, for example, I mean, my neck is starting to kill me, like carrying around massive charger, all that sort of stuff. So kind of be creative about what are your kind of showstoppers, and what are the things that are just nice to have, but you may not need. I think sometimes digital tools help us, you know, mitigate having to bring all that sort of stuff, and maybe just your phone can be enough. Let's turn to the chat here. Let's see. Sorry, here. For some reason I'm not seeing the name. Oh, yeah. The Metacognitive Diaries. Welcome, by the way. My reading issues with Airbnb changed me back to a hotel person. Had my booking canceled at the last minute. It was left to scramble for accommodations. Right. So that's a risk. And while that person may be very cordial, like over like messaging and things like that, you never know. Like if they're just gonna disappear, if something might come up, or they may have made arrangements to be out of town and then that was canceled, and they can do that stuff. And even if there's some kind of security for you to get your full refund, that doesn't take care of being then and there at the moment needing to solve that issue. And who knows, you know, when you book something last minute at a hotel, it could be very expensive, things like that. Yeah, and I'm sorry that happened to you. I have not had that issue yet with cancellations, but I've seen kind of in comments, and I've usually avoided a place if they've said canceled on the last minute, um, things like that. Yeah, the MacBook Pro charger is huge. Indeed, it's like it kind of weighs a lot, and when it's in the back of your bag, it's pulling down on your neck. It can be a bit much. Let's talk on that note about discomfort. You know, I think about how much discomfort you're willing to kind of endure, right? Whether it's like language differences, lost things, or time transitions. So, for me, one thing that I very much value is as I get older is sleep. Like I need like a certain amount, like 7 to 8 hours, probably more, based on what science tells us. But for example, like San Francisco is 3 hours behind Eastern Standard Time. If it's 11:30 here, it's 8:30 there. So kind of going to that space can create like a deficiency with your sleep, especially if you're staying up much later, which I did with my friends when traveling and kind of freaking out about this whole wallet loss. Whereas Norway, going to Oslo and Trondheim and Bodo, those were all 6 hours ahead. So they're on Central European Standard Time, if I have that correct. And, that is also a shift you have to make because you're thinking, okay, I'm flying at 7 p.m. or 1900 hours in Toronto. I'm going to get in about 1:30. I think that was my thing, or 1300 hours into Oslo. So you've kind of, I don't know, you've gone ahead and then over time you've sort of stepped back a bit. So you got to think like at that time, 1 p.m., and this is the kind of math I had to do in my head, it's going to be, there's 1300 hours. So I'd say it'd be like 9 a.m. essentially in Eastern time, Eastern Standard Time. So kind of having to make those mathematical jumps and realize that your body is going to respond differently when there's light and darkness and things of that sort. So what I downloaded was a thing here that I've got linked called the Time Shifter app. And it had some useful, data points like have caffeine at this time, stop drinking it entirely, try to sleep on the plane if you can, black everything out, things like that, and sit in darkness. I'm not going to lie. I mean, I basically stayed up till about 3 a.m. Every night when I was in Norway because I couldn't sleep. And then I would wake up about noon, at 11:30 noon. So I would just kind of go, I don't know, a bit drowsy, things like that. And just sleep is kind of difficult for me when I'm traveling. So I just tried to roll with it. But I think this app is very helpful. I think it gives you one free flight sort of trip to help. And then there's a charge to it. So take that if you will. There are other apps out there that may be useful. But coming back was not an issue. I think it's because it was easier to stay up later on my schedule when I got back. But it makes calling very difficult too, things like that, if you're trying to call family back. Also, like if we're thinking about language, like many in Scandinavia, I had learned like just English is very much part of that. Culture and sort of learning for many folks. So, I just kind of humbly was like, I'm sorry, I don't speak Norwegian. Like, is English? I just always said, is English okay? Before we started speaking, and they were very, happy to do that. And I think most people would appreciate when you just admit what you're trying to do, and rather than just going right to English. So just kind of checking on that can be useful. But I was grateful that was the case. I'm someone who's mostly monolingual and read in French and so forth. But that's it's a discomfort I have with myself, and it just gets amplified when you travel. And then kind of our charger, like just some quick things before we bring on our guest. I'll note, absolutely grab an international travel adapter, like in a local space before you go. You don't want to get it potentially at the airport. They may charge you a bit more. Who knows? This is the one that I had that I use for everything. Like I could just plug it right into the European sort of outlets that they have. And these kind of things let you have many adapters for you no matter where you're going. So I think it's a worthwhile investment, if you're going to be gone for an extended period. Bring a power brick too. So, like, if you have, I had one that was mostly for mobile devices, and if I'm out all day with my backpack, let's say I'm at like talks or I'm doing interviews, I'm gonna run out of juice pretty quickly. So rather than taking something like my charger for my MacBook, maybe I just leave that back and then take everything else along with me. And I think a charger can really help. Don't forget that your iPhone storage can be your phone storage generally can fill up really quickly if you're taking like amazing pictures while you're out. So I was taking some nice pictures of like fjords in Norway, and unfortunately my phone just filled up. So you can see I've already got like 9 gigs, probably more of stuff on here. I'm kind of a hoarder when it comes to like phone storage, so I've got to remind myself to do that. And yes, metacognitive diary saying cultural humility is huge when traveling. Yeah, just admit who you are, acknowledge your position. And I think if you're coming off as someone who generally like isn't quite comfortable like in that culture, I think people will appreciate it very much. So I found that in places, even when I'm traveling around France a couple of years ago, and just saying what is it? I always said, "Je parle français un petit peu," I'd say that. And they're like, "Thanks for trying." Okay. Anyways, let's talk English. It's just kind of a way of not feeling like you're inserting like that English dominance that we see so much, and especially in expectations of writing. Last 2 things, and then we'll bring on our guest, the art and science of the carry-on bag. So my check bag, when I got back, was lost in Oslo for 3 days. And I know this happens. It's happened to me before. It's not like they're trying to lose it for you. Just an airport is a lot of moving parts, especially when you're connecting between airlines. So when you're packing that stuff, just be mindful of what you might be putting in it and what might be at stake if it gets lost. So the equipment that I had, like, for example, like this sort of GoPro cam I brought just to sort of capture a lot of scenes to later write about, totally gone for 3 days. And who knows if it was going to come back. So some of those things were in there, as were like just clothes and things like that. Those things, I was back at home, I could live without. But just imagine if you don't have like a spare set of clothes in your carry-on or like in your small bag, which I always pack as well as like medicine and other things that you might need on a daily basis. That's going to be gone in the ether until they locate it. So kind of think carefully about what you want to do. It's all prompted me to think about packing minimally next time, just because I think I can live without most of these things, right? Like I can do the job I want to do and kind of think about how to scale it. I'm, doing that advanced preparation. For example, realizing the conference provided laptops for presentations. Maybe I didn't need my own, right? What if I could just do all that prep work ahead of time? And then lastly, find a travel buddy. So I, hooked up with a number of Canadians while on the trip, as well as my good friend Amber Buck, and also just sent a lot of messages to friends while I was traveling. I think because when you're out, you want to make sure people know what you're doing and where you are. So I'm sending stuff to my wife and sending it to my friends on Discord, just to kind of keep a timestamp of where I've been in the world. And it's just like an extra level of security for me, and comfort. And also it's just fun to share, right? Without like, you're not bragging, you're just keeping people aware of what you're doing. And most of these are through private channels, right? I've heard about cases where people blog I do all kinds of stuff on social media, and then unfortunately, like someone tries to rob their house or something like that. Like there are dangers like that I want to be sensitive to. But for me, it's just kind of keeping a record for myself and for other people of what I've been up to. Okay, so we will begin here in just a minute with our conversation. So yeah, let's. And it looks like Tyler is here with us here, just waiting patiently. Let me introduce now our special guest after having talking about some of my experiences. And just sort of getting into like what that's like. So give me 1 second, and I've got some words to say. Okay, so I want to turn to a conversation with a new friend of mine and someone who's very experienced as a traveler and writer. So let me welcome. Actually, I had your bio here. Yes. Okay. Let's do that because we got to say how great you are, and you are. You got some cool stuff going on here. So I'm pleased to welcome Tyler Evans Tokarek, a specialist in writing studies. Tyler teaches undergraduate courses in academic writing, academic skills, and works one-on-one with students and faculty at the Robert Gillespie Academic Skills Center at the University of Toronto, Mississauga. Tyler has held a number of administrative positions at UTM, including coordinator of the Writing Development Initiative and director of the RGASC. Currently Associate Director of Scholarship of Teaching and Learning at the Institute for the Study of University Pedagogy. And I was so excited to hear about this institute coming out a few years back because it's focused on writing studies. And I met some great people, including Tyler, who are part of this initiative and part of this institute. Tyler's current research interests include writing transfer, writing assessment, university transition, writing across the curriculum, or WAC as we call it in the field, and discourse analysis. In 2014-2015, he was appointed as a visiting scholar at the University of Johannesburg in South Africa, working as the Academic Development Center, where he conducted research on the relationship between discourse and academic writing instruction and the growth of English as an international language. He's also a current research associate at the University of Dar es Salaam in Tanzania, where he's collaborating with communication studies faculty on a longitudinal research project studying the impact of mandatory first-year communication skills courses, and consulting as well on the development of a first university writing center in the country. And as published widely across Canada and beyond, so Discourse in Writing, the Canadian Journal for the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning, International Journal for the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning, Across the Disciplines, another field journal, and the Journal of College Student Retention. And doing all this in his spare time, when he has it, which we'll talk about too, enjoys going on Outback canoe trips, listening to live music, and traveling. So it's wonderful conversations at the conference. And let me go ahead and bring him on after that introduction. Okay. Tyler, hello.
Hey, Rich. How are you
doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Excellent. So glad to see you again.
Likewise. Yeah. Slightly different circumstances.
Yeah, exactly. And it's usually the opposite now, right? You meet somebody online and then you meet with them like later on. You're like, you're real. You're a real person.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad you could join us. And, like I was saying in introducing you, I was just impressed by the amount of travel and international work you've done and what you're doing at University of Toronto, Mississauga. It sounds very exciting. And I think you and the faculty that I met would be students would be lucky to have you. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I feel very privileged to have had the opportunity, some of which are referenced in the bio that you just, a lengthy bio that you just read out. Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I'll link to that too in the show notes if people want to learn a bit more about what you're up to. So we were talking about the work you've done in Tanzania, but I want to start by asking you, we met at the Writing Research Across Borders conference in Trondheim, Norway. Beautiful, little city. I want to go back. Can you tell viewers what you were presenting at the conference and what that was specifically?
Yeah, for sure. So you actually made reference to it in the bio. So it's the Writing Transfer Project at the University of Dar es Salaam in Tanzania. So the title of the research project is Measuring Writing Transfer from First-Year Communication Skills Courses, a longitudinal mixed methods research project. And I'm working on this with a colleague of mine, Dr. Michael Karani, who's a linguist, actually, not a writing studies person. But the linguistics department is combined with the communication skills department. So he's a specialist in Maasai languages, but he was quite interested to undertake this writing transfer research project with me. It's a 5-year longitudinal study of writing transfer that began in 2022 and will extend through until 2027.
Amazing.
And effectively, we're just trying to figure out if the skills, knowledge, and attitudes that students develop in mandatory first-year communication skills courses actually transfer to other contexts. So specifically, writing courses or writing intensive courses that they take at the university, but we're tracking them through to the end of their undergraduate studies and 1 year beyond. So seeing if they are able to apply any of those skills in the workplace, for example. So there's about 6,000 students that we're tracking who take this first year course. There's 3 courses actually, clustered by disciplines. And then we are collecting all sorts of data. Do you want to hear about the actual data, or is that too technical?
No. Yeah, if it's okay, I know I didn't ask for like a slide or anything, but yeah, do you want to give us some highlights
Sure.
of?
Yeah, I mean it's
found, yeah.
pretty basic, but it will, I think, give people a sense of the scale of the project, which is certainly intimidating for me. Anyway, so there's 6,000 students. We survey all of the students we already have before they start their first year of university, so in the first couple of weeks of classes. And then we survey them at the end of that academic year and the end of every academic year following until they graduate. And then one more time 1 year after they graduate. So we'll have about 6 touch points with those 6,000 students, or the percentage of those who actually respond to the survey.
Mm-hmm.
We're also tracking 15 students through the course of their studies, interviewing them every semester and collecting writing samples from them so we can track their writing development through an analysis of the writing they do, both in that communication skills course, but more importantly, in the other courses. We're interviewing, there are 20 plus instructors who teach these 6,000 students. So we've interviewed all of those instructors, and then we'll be interviewing them once again after they have finished teaching their first year class. And then we're interviewing another 20 odd instructors who teach these students in so-called content area courses to get a sense from them of how well the students are writing, what they may have taken or not taken from those other from the first year course into their own course. And then we're doing personal observations of the teaching and learning as it happens throughout that time. So the goal obviously then is to sort of, depending on what we learn, either revise the course so that it more closely aligns with their needs in the rest of their academic careers, or revise other courses so that they contain more opportunities for students to transfer those skills. So maybe change the assignments, or maybe keep everything the same depending on what we find. We have already made an argument based on our baseline data for this writing center that you referenced in the bio. So that discussion's underway, I should say. And then at a more theoretical level, where most writing transfer theory is very American in its focus. It's conducted by American scholars at American universities using American students. And so we're hoping to test the applicability of that theory in a very different context, where virtually all students speak English as a third language, not a second or a first, but a third language, and are coming from very different educational, cultural backgrounds, etc.
Yeah, my colleague Crystal Van Kooten looked at transfer with media, and looking at like how students have adapted since first year writing. But yeah, it was largely an American context, and I think that distinction you're pointing out is third language. So how those sort of culturally, how like transfer sort of works, and let alone with a third language. So very fascinating, and I was delighted to hear about how the project was unfolding.
Yeah, it's very, so we just shared the baseline data at that conference, going back every month or every year for a month, every July, to continue the project, revise it as needs be. It's a case study, so we're very interested in the real life sort of bounded setting of the University of Dar es Salaam. And things change on the ground quite frequently, so one needs to be there in person.
Yeah, I mean, and you said July. I was going to ask you about that, like how often you go. My sense is that this international collaboration like requires considerable traveling for you, something that may be difficult to do just the project itself remotely. But can you talk about that experience of like what I think I was telling you before the show of being there, like the kind of idea of being present with those students, with those researchers, and that's just something I had to grapple with as a qualitative researcher who couldn't go and interview and stuff for about 2 years.
Yeah. Well, I mean, initially we had planned to go there for an entire year and do a slightly different project. COVID made that impossible, and so we reworked our ideas and came up with something that could be done with a combination of remote communication and occasional, like 1 month per year of field work. But as a case study, there needs to be, you need to be present, physically present, for a number of different reasons. one of the most practical is that most students at the university don't have access to data. They don't have personal computers. They don't have widely accessible Wi-Fi. So a lot of data needs to be collected in person. So we tried to collect data through the surveys, through a typical, in a North American context, online survey, and our response rate was completely insufficient. And so we're going to have to administer those surveys in person in the classroom as a sort of non-credit bearing or non-mark bearing exercise. So that's just one example of why the in-person is required. I saw a reference. Was that the chat that jumped up on the screen there?
Yeah. You're seeing the kind of live, like being in the thing. But yeah.
So the answer to the question is what we learned from our the demographic portion of the survey is they're all 100% traditional students in the sense that they're direct from high school first-year students.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, was data collected on non-traditional first-year students as well, mature transfers, et cetera?
Yeah, they're not. They're certainly in the small sample. I mean, we only had a 6% response rate to the 6,000 surveys, but of those 6%, not a single one was a mature student or a transfer student. Yeah, it's interesting. Same goes for the interviews. I mean, the interviews, we tried to do some interviews in person by Zoom, and they did not work for technological and other reasons. So, yeah. There's also, Rich, it's worthwhile saying, you mentioned cultural humility and your preamble, or when you were speaking before I came on, and there's a lot of stakeholders in this project, and it's imperative that trust is built with all of those stakeholders. They need to know that I'm not just hanging out for a short amount of time, that I'm committed to the project, I'm committed to the goals of the project as an outsider. And the only way to build that trust, I think, is through in-person meetings, in-person discussions, demonstrating that I care about the people, that I understand the academic system that we're assessing, because it's a very different academic system from what I'm familiar with here at U of T. And as I mentioned before, we're sort of working with something that's in progress, and there's a lot of things that change. And if you don't collect that information on a regular basis, you're not going to keep it, and you're not going to have good data.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, I'm thinking about my time as a reporter when I would go and do these interviews. Like sometimes I just like to sit with the person and not tape anything for a while, get to know them, and just say like, listen, like I want to tell you about me, what I'm doing, and we can gesture back to some of those conversations if they're comfortable. Like, but I think just that kind of priming, is really important, just to be respectful for where you're coming into, like I so wanted to write about like the Arctic Circle and stuff, but I'm like, I need to go back there and just stay and just really soak it in and get to know people, and then kind of say, this is my agenda. But slowing down a bit, it seems to be part of that humility. I'm understanding.
I interviewed it was 20 plus interviews, each an hour long, with very specific questions, all of the instructors. And yet subsequent or after those interviews, we'd be having lunch or just chatting outside of an office. And I get much better answers to my interview questions in those informal, food-inspired settings and the actual formal interviews, right? But so that's an example as well of, in the case study approach, needing to be there in person.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's step back a bit. I wanted to ask you a question based on this recent experience and what we've talked about earlier in the bio and so forth. Just generally for anyone like listening in, how does writing, in your view, like serve traveling and vice versa? And kind of touched on some of that in the previous question, but I want to ask you that one as well.
Yeah. So in a more abstract or theoretical way, I think there's a lot of similarities between writing and traveling. Writing is a process, right? It's a threshold concept in writing studies. Writing is a process.
Yeah.
Well, obviously traveling is a process as well. And building from that, writing is, writers always have more to learn. They're always, writing is not perfectible, those sorts of ideas. Well, travelers also have more to learn, always have more to learn. The big one for me is this idea of collaborating. And to get anything done with writing, people need to collaborate and work together. Same goes for traveling. You'll never survive as a traveler or be a good traveler unless you collaborate with the people around you in the same way that one must collaborate with to get things accomplished with writing. In a more sort of abstract way, writing is a very creative process. When you write, you make meaning, you create meaning, you invent knowledge. Same goes for traveling. When I travel, I learn a lot, and that learning process is not dissimilar from the learning process associated with writing. Both cases, you can think of the meaning-making process as one that you don't have complete control over. Like initially, when I write, and when most people write, I think, when you put words on a screen or words on a page, you're generating the sort of content of your message. And the real learning happens when you reflect on what you've sort of brainstormed or put down on the page. Same goes for traveling, right? You sort of walk around when you're traveling, you bump into stuff, you discover new things. You make meaning when you travel in a very similar way that you make meaning when you write.
Yeah.
I think so. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, I have stories to tell more when I'm out and about, and kind of when I reflect critically on that. And I think social has been a good outlet for that, in a lot of ways. Stories sort of documenting as you go, and that kind of work. And I found it was much more difficult to do that kind of on the fly live, like reporting, so to say, of your own social experiences. Well before that, like 10 plus years ago, when I was at a paper at 2 or 3 pictures or something like that. But what you can do now, as you're even walking and stuff, it's amazing. Like live blogging, live streaming, things like that. Yeah. Okay, so just for some advice, I wonder what you might say about this. Just whether it's based on this recent experience or previously, like what advice do you have for writers traveling on, let's say, an assignment or project for the first time? And I was sharing some of that stuff earlier about things I had lost or things like that. But yeah, what do you make of just general advice for this kind of pursuit?
Well, obviously you need to take the time to write while traveling. I do 2 kinds of writing when I'm traveling. Okay. I do sort of field notes or journaling multiple times per day. And then I do the more formal academic writing that is my job, I guess, typically with collaborators. So articles for publication, proposals, grant applications, presentations, all those sorts of things. Both are important, and I think they do need to be done in situ, right, on site. I like to write by hand, which is really difficult for me. I'm out of practice. I do all my writing on a computer at work, but when I'm traveling, I like to do it by hand. So I suspect that's the case. The challenge with that would be similar for other people. I even tried to relearn cursive when I was in Tanzania last year, and it was painful. But for some reason, the deliberate effort required made me more reflective on what I was doing, made me more thoughtful, made me slow down and really think about what I was writing. So maybe, if people are patient, they want to try something like that. When I'm doing that kind of writing, the name, date, and location is absolutely imperative. You can lose track of those sorts of details. So those coordinates are crucial for keeping track of the little details that are going to be important 3 years later when you're trying to publish the results of what you've been researching, etc. And people, I think, are the most important thing. You can't possibly conduct research, and you shouldn't conduct research when you're traveling without the full and enthusiastic support of your collaborators, the people that you're working with. So I try to learn as much about those local partners and write about them so I don't forget who they are, improve my understanding of who they are. Say yes to every invitation you get. my suggestion, every opportunity, even if it seems very unrelated to whatever the research or project is that brings you to where you are. In many cases, that opportunity won't happen again, and you'll almost certainly accidentally learn something that's of value to the research, or certainly just to yourself as a person.
Yeah, it reminds me like with conferencing, especially, which I know we were going to talk about too. Some of your work in South Africa. I learn a lot outside of the like the panel space. Just sometimes I'll just sit in the main area and go introduce myself to people, and that sometimes will like take people by surprise. I'll say, "Hi, I have seen you in the conference. How are you doing?"
Yeah.
I learned so much just in those little informal conversations, and I acknowledge like that I have that sort of, I don't know, innate sort of approach to doing it. I like to do it, and that may be difficult for some of us, but yeah, I mean, if any possible way you can kind of just absorb some of the things that are happening outside of the formal, arrangements, it's quite valuable.
I agree.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, so I know we've got you for a couple more minutes. So I want to ask you a bit about, just so we can kind of move forward to, move forward in the conversation, but step back in time, as we mentioned. You did some time in South Africa with the University of Johannesburg in 2014 and 15 as a visiting scholar, in conjunction with the writing centers. I just want to ask you, like, what was your first week like as you got to that space, and you had this experience doing it, and things like that. What was that like for you? And I'll pull up the links we were talking through as well.
Sure.
Yeah.
So you mean like just like personally, what was it like, or professionally, or both?
Or both, because they're so entangled, right? I think like at this point, but you're arriving to work with this international partner, and beginning to do like a pretty intense project. And, things like that.
So in a personal, like, just to provide a bit of context, I guess it was me and my family. So my wife and my 5-year-old son. We had given up our house in Canada. We leased it for a year, so we were technically homeless, and we had a couple of suitcases each, and that's what we were going to live with for a year. So that was, intimidating to have in the back of our head.
Yeah.
For the first week, we were staying in a little teeny B&B as we looked for more permanent housing. We learned that there were a lot of scams at the time, getting unsuspecting expats to commit to and pay down payments on long-term housing that didn't exist or was rented by somebody else. So we were living in this very small place. And most importantly, perhaps, I just rented this little stick shift car. Hadn't driven manual for a while, driving on the other side of the road from what I was accustomed to in a very hilly city. And we'd heard all the horror stories about violent crime in Johannesburg. So we were, aware of that and interested to find out how much of it was real. So with that as the sort of context, I showed up for my first day of work at the University of Johannesburg, only to find the entire perimeter of the campus is very secure. It's fenced. There's a perimeter fence and there's guards. And to get onto campus, you need to present your University of Johannesburg ID and present your thumbprint. Neither of which I had. So predictable chaos and confusion with emails back and forth to my boss, who was on campus. Anyways, with all of that, I was introduced to probably 50 people in the departments that I was going to be doing research. Promptly forgot all of their names because I wasn't taking notes religiously, like I just talked about or advised. It was very overwhelming and very inspiring at the same time. And to bring it back to writing studies, the very first meeting I had with the other writing instructors at the Writing Center, we got into a fairly animated debate about whether grammar should be taught in the Writing Center, whether this was appropriate. So that was familiar. And then we had another conversation about code switching. That was familiar. And then the next day I went to a workshop for new faculty and learned that 10% of UJ students, University of Johannesburg students, grew up in a house without a single book, and 30% grew up in a house with less than 10 books. So that was very unfamiliar. So I had this very sort of out of body, strange experience of, yes, this is the world that I know. This is the world I'm familiar with. And this is the world that is very unfamiliar, that I have absolutely no background or context for. And that was pretty much the experience for the next 12 months. Lots of points of entry into the discourse around writing instruction, and lots of things that were fundamentally foreign and just unrecognizable to me.
Right. Yeah. And I'm just thinking, as you talked about some of that stuff, like you're thinking about what you've read about, at a distance about maybe Johannesburg, and you get into these, you got this kind of different emotion you're coming in with, like this uncertainty, which I think for most people traveling in, they're kind of, where have I landed? Like,
Yeah.
especially for me, I was just sort of admitting being mostly monolingual, looking at the signs and going, I don't know what that says, but like, and not thinking even to pull up my phone and maybe check. Couched with like what your aims are for the project, right? Is to meet and network. Fascinating stuff. We were talking also about a conference you did with the university and a number of engineers. Do you want to talk a bit about that, or?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, cool.
It was a fascinating experience, and it really links quite nicely to your the theme of writing and as traveling. So the university, to get lots of faculty involved in the sort of the more prestigious national conferences, puts a lot of time and effort into supporting faculty to get their proposals accepted and to get the papers written.
Yeah.
So the Faculty of Engineering, with my assistants, we sort of planned a series of supports for the instructors. So we began with a full day writing retreat offsite. So we all traveled together from the university to another facility and spent the day talking about ways to brainstorm research topics, research questions, that sort of thing. Prepared research questions in small groups and then shared those ideas with other groups. And by the end of the day, we all had pretty solid proposals that we then submitted to the conference. And when we got the proposals that were accepted, we went through the same process again, this time a different facility, again with food and all sorts of things to make it attractive.
Yeah.
And we wrote good chunks of the papers together, got feedback on the drafts of the papers, and then in small groups would meet periodically, informally, not with supports, not off-site and with food and all the rest of it, but a very collaborative process. And then all of the papers that were accepted were published in the proceedings in advance of the conference. And then we went and gave a talk that sort of spoke to that published paper that people could have read in advance or could read afterwards as they preferred. But we all traveled to another city, about a 4-hour drive away, on a bus, and then we all lodged together. It was quite an experience. Learned a lot, got to know a lot of people in the university, engineers with an interest in writing and engineers that had no interest in writing whatsoever. It was a fantastic experience. Yeah, and you can see the proceedings there.
Yeah, fantastic. I mean, and the idea of peer reviewing each other, being together, like it seems like the workshops that we love to do in our classes is being unfolded live with people rather than as a reviewer 1, reviewer 2.
Yes,
it's happening. It's unfolding together. That sounds.
Yeah, it was a very organic experience, and I've made some friends, some professional relationships and friendships that will stay with me forever, right? As a result of that experience. It was really neat. And the whole time we were traveling. And interestingly, I wrote about that experience of going to the conference and preparing the papers in a blog that I was writing as I was over there for the year.
Wow. Yeah. And I think you were telling me that you've since taken that down, but like in terms of, I know some students do study abroad sort of stuff, and I think our university also asked them to sort of live blog, like, why they're doing it. What were your thoughts on sort of what did that do for you, I guess, like in terms of its value to blog about why you were there?
So the value for me was I was translating my personal and professional experiences for a very diverse set of readers that I had in mind. So, my mom would read the blog, my friends from high school would read the blog, and my colleagues at the University of Toronto would read the blog. So taking that experience and reflecting on it, translating it into languages that would be appropriate for different readers really made me more deeply understand what I was experiencing at a very rapid pace, right? When you're traveling and working at the same time and in a foreign country, things happen and they just sort of wash over you. But taking the time to write the blog for different readers really helped me process that experience and make it more permanent.
Excellent. So what are you working on right now?
So a lot of my time when I'm not just teaching and doing admin is this project that we started talking about. So that's an ongoing project, and I learned so much at this conference we were just at together that was great, but unfortunately it means revising a lot of my data collection instruments and improving them in light of the feedback that I got. So that's a lot of work. I'm also looking here more locally, working on a project with a number of colleagues, trying to figure out who uses and doesn't use our writing center on campus. And this involves collecting a lot of demographic data from the repository of student information here at U of T, and the equity survey that students do. So collecting demographic data to try to figure out, and our working hypothesis is that a lot of the students who would benefit from using the Writing Center don't come and use it. And a lot of the students who are already quite proficient writers are using the bulk of the appointments. And so we want to address that and make it a service that's more equitably used across campus. So that's a pretty interesting project. And then I'm collaborating with the SocProf on a lit review module that we embedded into our second year methods course, and trying to assess the impact of that.
Fantastic. And we have a question in the chat about significant cultural differences with academic collaboration styles. Do you have do you want to just one final minute? We've kept you a bit longer. I apologize, but if you're okay with that, I think it's interesting.
I'm having a good time. So yeah, absolutely. I think there are significant cultural differences, and the primary difference. So when I collaborate, and I do a lot of collaboration, almost everything that I've done that I've published has been collaborative. So I do a lot of it here. Here it's a very structured kind of relationship. So we set a meeting well in advance, and we work to that deadline, and then we bring what we've accomplished to the table. Then we go our separate ways. We work separately. We come back together. So it's very structured and planned. Whereas the collaboration with my fantastic colleague Michael Karani and others when I'm there, it's much more fluid, much more informal, and it's sort of always present. So it's ongoing, and it's fantastic. I really like it, but it takes. It's a very different way of managing time, setting milestones and deadlines, that sort of thing.
Wow.
I quite like it. Yeah.
Well, wish you all the best for continuing that project. Again, it sounds super fascinating, and you and I will have to travel locally to meet each other again.
Yes,
talk some
absolutely.
shop. Because it's fantastic meeting you all. And just by the way, I didn't say this on the stream earlier. I met many of you at University of Toronto and Mississauga just through happenstance, because at the conference they didn't name the affiliations. I go, oh, there are other people here from Toronto, awesome. And so thanks for welcoming me in to your group for a bit, and it was a real pleasure talking with you here on the stream as well.
Congress is going to be at your institution in May, so definitely we'll touch base there.
Absolutely.
Not before.
Excellent. Well, thanks again, and we'll link to all your fantastic work here in the show notes too, and hope to speak to you soon in another capacity.
Thanks for inviting me and letting me share.
Okay, have a good one. Bye. All right, folks. So what a fantastic chat. Yes, thanks to Metacognitive Diaries for also asking some really, really good questions to think about throughout this. So what I'm going to do now is just take a little break, just for 1 second, a little standing break, because that's the thing too is, opposite of sort of being on the move in many different capacities with writing, sometimes we need to take a pause and take care of ourselves. And I have more to say about that, I guess, in the travel sense right here after the breaks. 1 second, and I will be back in just a minute. Okay, folks, we are back talking about writing as and traveling. So I was just blown away by that conversation. So many interesting things that Tyler had to share with us. Was kind enough to share with us about, his experiences sort of moving throughout the world. And there's a lot of things we can kind of unpack from the conversation that we've, the sort of things that were previewed before, and then our conversation about what this all means and what might be some things to think about in addition. So just to recap, like I spoke about things like losing my wallet and passport and thinking about places to stay, finding a travel buddy and things like that. And thanks for all your contributions as well in the chat for, what your experiences has been. Like one thing I didn't get to bring up in the chat, I think this was by Metacognitive Diaries. It was on, or no, it was Dia who said this. I always carry my electronics, medication, change of clothes, and travel size toiletries in my cabin bag. I'm jaded from being stuck without bags. And yeah, I mean, it's just so hard to rely on airports, and I do not mean that in a real negative sense, just that with all the moving parts and things, there's a lot of opportunity for things to go wrong. So for example, like I was quite nervous and sleep deprived when I went to the Oslo airport and checked in, with my bags and all that, and they had asked me to go into the manual check-in counter, and so they took everything, and I was already sort of nervous about like any language barriers, and so I was just trying to be very kind and things like that. And so they took my stuff, and I was like, okay. I just walked away, and then I got to Toronto, and then they said that it was still spinning around somewhere in the airport. So as far as you might, there are other factors. I think with Tyler and I talking about the personal and professional, some of these sort of personal dispositions you may have, conditions and so forth, is going to feed into and layer what you're doing. Let's say if you're on assignment or something like that, and sometimes it's out of your control. So we have to sort of anticipate that uncertainty and that discomfort that sometimes sort of comes up. Let's see. I'm going to share a different part of my screen for a second because I want to show you all something. But if you're thinking about doing this in the future as a sort of project, just remember you can always start kind of small. If you're doing, like, let's say a international trip, let's say you're studying abroad, or you've been tasked, let's say with a student paper or something else, to go do some international coverage, even if that's crossing into the US, how could you prepare for that? What are some ways you could do it? So the one thing that I think kind of helped me, and I'm coming at this like very, starting up and so forth, stepping back a little bit in time. I did this so long ago. It's 2005. It's funny. It makes you feel so old, but like, I'll just show you all. One of my first things was only 5 hours away from where I went, where I was living in Cincinnati, Ohio. And I went to the Andy Warhol Museum, and kind of argued to do a travel story about it for a local paper. So let's say if you're interested in working with Excalibur as a student, what kind of little sort of travel piece could you do for them? What might be interesting to that particular audience? There are some possibilities. If you're maintaining a blog already as a writer, what kind of experience could you blog about and related to that? Kind of think about that as a trial run potentially. So this is for publication, yes. It was paid for by the paper, yes. It's about 1,000 to something word. It's not really that long, but it was a good test run. Taking pictures and think about who's going to help me take pictures, things like that is what the paper needed. And I learned a lot just by doing that about what to bring with me, what not to bring, things of that sort. So thinking about, yes, that was a different world. Definitely. I mean, we were just getting into doing a lot of digital journalism. So I kind of think now with this, like, I could, you can even do, like, I mean, this paper was really moving to online, and they were even asking for more multimedia contributions. So I could sort of see this being, um, I don't know, enhanced in a lot of ways. It'd be kind of fun to do like a retrospective, go back to some of the things I had essentially had covered at the time. But yeah, there's me, little old me. I brought my mom along because I was, wanted to bring her on the trip, and so she helped along with that. It's kind of funny. And then the next one I did, I was kind of getting. It was only an hour away or so, and this is 2007 when I came back full time. Was going to hiking and so forth like that. And if you're sort of as the snow begins to melt and so forth, if you're interested in any of the hiking, I think there's a value in just going out and even off the books, taking like your materials that you want to potentially use to write on a larger trip and just documenting everything, taking myriad pictures of the sites that you're visiting. And then if you've got sound, things like that, some kind of recorder on your phone, capturing all of that and just writing about what it's like to be there. Sensory writing is something I've talked about on the stream in a few ways. And I think like writing about a location that may be of interest to other readers, it's imperative to be attuned to like what's sort of happening locally or what the environment kind of looks like. So I kind of wrote about Southeast Ohio and sort of what you could experience at nature preserves and things like that. But they were all about these photos because I ended up finding like a general store nearby, and it had like it was basically a museum for metal sort of lunch packs and stuff like that we don't see a lot of anymore. But it was an old show, Welcome Back Kotter, and Star Trek, Star Wars, all that kind of stuff. It was pretty fascinating, but you can only find that when you go and visit. And for me, I just do really well in sensory writing when I can actually look back at it. And it's hard to remember what you found, especially if you're sleep deprived and feeling a bit uncertain about where you are. Yes. So welcome, Dr. Bell, as well. And yeah, like this is just some pictures. And I'm so grateful to my mom, by the way, for keeping a record of this, because I forgot about these experiences, but I think I carry them with me as a reporter and a writer. Yeah, I don't do that anymore, but I'm reporting that much. And yeah, that's just to say too, I have so many other pictures I would share, but like, looking at my sort of list, I continually ask myself, what could I do with all this media that I've captured? And I think like, while we can think about writing and traveling together in the kind of print and digital sense and alphabetic sense, we could do a lot with looking at like moving images and stitching together like video essays and things of that sort. So I keep asking myself, like, what am I going to do with all this footage that I captured of times in the snow and so forth in Oslo? What am I going to do with this image of Oslo on the skyline, or even traveling by train up to the Arctic Circle and things like that? How can I explain this when it's enhanced by media, is what I keep asking myself. I don't know if sometimes just writing can really capture and convey what I was experiencing while I was out here. Just some stuff of like harbors and things like that, walking around, different parts of Oslo. I just capture, and I think as Tyler was saying too, like the idea of there's some beers. I like breweries. In fact, I'm hoping to teach a class soon on that. But having just some kind of informal way of capturing stuff to tell a story later about your travels, just seems to work well for my process. Okay, just turning back to the chat here. All the mountains. I love reading blogs from AT through hikers. Yeah, I mean, Appalachian Trail, things like that. Especially if you can do it live, it's potentially safer, so you're keeping in touch with folks. But it's also just watching a story, like the research method unfold as you go. Like I do that on social so that I can refer back to it later on and just make sure that, like, those stories, for example, stay archived for me. Really interesting stuff here. Okay. Well, let's wrap things up for today. Again, like, really fascinating stuff. I hope this is helpful for thinking about what to do when you're on your next assignment, or you're going for a conference, or you're doing something, even if it's kind of crossing a border or it's going about an hour or so away. There's things we have to consider when we're doing this. One thing we didn't get into as well that I think maybe more attention maybe for another chat is writing as and traveling, in the sense that making your writing move. We didn't get into that theory, these ideas of rhetorical moves or circulation, in that you're composing something that can take off and travel throughout the world right from your desk, right? That's a whole nother thing we could explore. For this conversation, we were focusing on physically going to certain places, but I think that would be interesting to revisit this and think more about uptake and things like that, how texts take flight, so to say, if we want to use that metaphor. Dr. Bell saying, CV Bell saying, I love finding spaces that are in between planes, trains, etc. Somehow it's so nice to write in these liminal spaces. Absolutely. I mean, yeah, it's like, it's the in between. You've got downtime. I took a 7-hour flight to London and then to Oslo, and I don't know, like I'm opening my laptop. I feel kind of a bit inspired. I'm doing some marking. There's nothing else you can do but just sit there anyways. So why not do some writing if you have a chance? Good friend of mine, David Mack, who is a comic book artist, he insists on like doing writing and sketching while on the plane. And I've heard this conversation from other developers and creatives and writers as well. So in fact, I think Via Rail did a residency. Let me look this up real quick. They did a residency for writers, because I think it's interesting. There was an artist on board program that was specifically for artists, and I think there was even a novelist at one point that did this. And it wasn't so that they could write about the experience of being on the rail, but just to work. But it's been suspended. That was, I think, before the pandemic really took hold. But how fascinating to just have a transportation service support you while you're trying to do work. And it's usually possible now with Wi-Fi. Like when I was on the Nord trains going up to the Arctic, there was Wi-Fi the entire time. I had that access, but I also had plenty of space to just slow down and write by hand. Yeah, I miss those days traveling with a toddler now. Sometimes I'll bring my son with me to do some travel, just because I think it's cool to like let him see the process. For example, I went to Montreal with my family and let my wife sort of stay back and have her own time, but brought him along like while I was doing interviews and stuff. And as a 6-year-old, got kind of bored after an hour, but at least got to see what it's like being with dad and doing research like in public, in the open, in a different place other than home. So yeah, there's advantages to it, but yeah, it can be difficult to kind of have family along when you're going to something on assignment. I've had my share of that many times as a journalist and researcher. Yep, absolutely blows my mind that there is Wi-Fi everywhere and a supercomputer in my pocket now. I was impressed that the trains had free Wi-Fi. That was like just a baked-in thing. It was, it was hard to do like video calls and stuff, but like that wasn't my aim. It was more just checking in. Searching for internet cafes. Interesting. Yeah, I don't think I got to. I think libraries had been my jam. But 10 plus years ago, trying to do live reporting at a conference, or not at a conference, but at a festival, music festival like Bonnaroo, super difficult. They had one hub for journalists to go to and to check in. So throughout the day, I'm capturing all this footage, editing it, and then uploading it, and waiting an hour or more for large files to work. So I assume that we've come a long way since then, especially for journalists. But I think we especially have with trains and things like that. Okay, so folks, that's all I have for this week. Thanks for the chat as well, and again to Dr. Tyler for joining us. Let me just preview about what's coming up. As always, if you have any ideas for these or anyone who you think would be good for special guest chats, let me know in the comments or offline or off the stream as well. So next week, talking about writing as and revising, writing as in virtual reality after that. So what's it like to put on a headset and try to write in that space? I'll just say it's very difficult, and I'll show you why. Writing as in intervening in a conversation. We're thinking about lit review as an intervention, writing as and presenting, and then finally writing as and composing yourself. So we have a number of streams left after today. Looks like 5 or so. And yeah, always a pleasure doing this. So until then, have a great week, and we'll talk to you soon.